Everyone, welcome to another edition of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program Teacher Certification course. Thank you for the warm welcome. It's pretty warm outside too. Thank you if you've been joining us here in the headquarters. You could be seated. If you're joining us online, thank you for joining us. We're going to continue tonight in the parenting manual, the Peaceful Solution Parenting Manual, written all the way back in, I believe, 2010. So what's that, 15 years? We're going to be picking up in Chapter 2 where Chris left off last time. But I want to remind everyone, if you're joining us online, please feel free to go to the top of the official Peaceful Solution Facebook page there, and there should be a little drop-down menu with the books, free downloads. And we're in the parenting manual, a hands-on approach, Peaceful Solution Parenting Manual. Tonight we're going to be covering some, and I'm really not going to rush through this. I'm sorry, I'm just not going to, I'm not sorry. I'm not going to rush through a topic that's extremely pivotal in parenting. For parents to understand, and not just parents, but the people that are being certified to teach have to understand many of these, like Chris was saying in his last class, these topics regarding emotional, sexual abuse, and the ramifications that we actually see manifesting in the world all around us, but we don't recognize the genesis of these sicknesses and diseases and mental disorders. So we need to learn more about it. We brushed over it. You know, we covered actually pretty in depth in the self-control unit regarding foods and some other things that were actually causing pollution in the minds and bodies of the people. But we also need to understand how important it is to, in raising a child, in bringing up a child in this world, to be careful how we treat that child and make sure we're not abusing it in any way, shape, or form. So, having said that, I'm just kind of preparing you for what we're going to be covering tonight. If you'll go back to LP2, let's see, that's in lesson 2. LP2, page B, step number 9 is where Chris left off. So we'll do a little bit of a review before we go on. It says, explain that when parents lack training in positive moral character, they can become abusive to their children. So notice this. If they're not trained, this can occur. It doesn't necessarily take place, intentionally. Sometimes it's unintentional abuse, okay, because of lack of moral education, all right? And I'm going to put everybody in that category tonight. I'm going to put everybody that's never been taught this program in the category of uneducated in proper moral character. So therefore, if they are not trained in proper moral character, they are abusing their child in some way, shape, or form, even though they might not be aware. Okay, let's just say that right out front. I know for a fact that I wasn't aware of many of the things that I was doing before joining the Peaceful Solution, and I started getting that education, which is awareness. Awareness is like a light bulb going on in your head where you go, boing, you know, and something just like strikes you, and you're like, wow, I never thought about that. You know, I never even thought about it that way. Wow, you know. And I've had many of those moments since I've been in the Peaceful Solution, and I'm sure you have too. Many of us can share many things that really were life-changing bits of information. So, and we continue to learn them. as we go along. So, again, I'm going to repeat, if you haven't been trained in moral character, then you're going to find out eventually, if you take this course, that you are abusing your child in some way, shape, or form without even realizing it. Okay? Because remember, a lot of times people, they think abuse means, hitting, slapping, hitting with a coat hanger, putting someone in the corner for 3 days, or go to your room without food for the night, or, well, those are forms of abuse. But we don't understand, but we will, how deep this actually goes. And people that are being certified to teach this program need to be the most educated people on the face of the earth, because you're going to be hit with these questions. And if you don't know the definitions, you don't know how to explain it, which is okay, in certain cases, because if somebody asks us a question as teachers, we should be able to say, well, if we don't know the answer, we should be able to tell them in showing humility, well, I'm not really sure about that, but I'll look it up and I'll get back with you. I'll look it up and I'll get back with you on that. Okay? That's honorable. That's an honorable thing to do. That's not being stupid. That's not being, just because we don't have all the answers. None of us have all the answers. But we should be willing to go seek those answers for people that are asking for the solution to the problem. So back to step 9 there in lesson plan 2, page B. I'm going to read that one more time. It says, explain that when parents lack training in positive moral character, they can become abusive to their children. Read the first 2 paragraphs under acknowledge mistakes, finding solutions, which Chris did. Briefly discuss the various forms of abuse and a few examples of each. And the reason it tells you that, and mainly in the book, is in a lot of situations in a public area, a public school, you're going to have boys and girls mixed, and there's certain topics that we can't talk about, that we don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. It's not respectful to do so in mixed company, so we don't do that. We have to use discernment in these things. And but in a situation like we have tonight, where we have, I don't see any girls running around here. There are certain things that I can talk about. I don't have to get too graphic with you, but I can at least explain what the book is telling you, because you need to know. You're being trained to be a teacher of peace, and a teacher of peace needs to be well equipped with knowledge and information, because knowledge is power. Remember, power, not to go, yeah, I'm smarter than you. No, power to pull somebody out of the pit that they're in, give them the knowledge to help them get out of the pit that they're in and get on a right track to a true moral character. So having said that, let's turn over to page 13, where Chris went over acknowledging mistakes and finding solutions. He talked about, at the top, I'll just rehearse that. It says, an important step in your training to become a better, more effective parent is to acknowledge that there are areas you need to improve in. Because even the very best parents can make mistakes. And I just said that in a different way. Even the very best parents in the world today, until you've been trained in true moral character, you really don't know the mistakes that you've made. Okay? But you will see as you go along, if you humble yourself to the program. The many stresses of modern day living, coupled with a lack of experience in parenting, can lead you to say or do things you could regret for years to come. I'm sure all of us can think of verbal things that we've said verbally, or things that we've done physically, etc., that we're sorry for today, that we had never done. But, if we get educated ahead of time, if we get educated in true moral character ahead of time, we don't have to look back with regret. That's the great thing about the peaceful solution. You don't have to have the regrets that many of us have to live with the rest of our life because of things we've done in our past. But you do need to learn to let those things go. Listen to me now. You got to learn to let it go. The things that have been done to us in the past, You got to let it go. Okay? You got to let it go. You know, forgiveness is one of the character traits we teach in the program, you know, and you need to forgive the wrongdoings of other people that they've done to you in the past. And the mistakes and the bad choices that we've made, we need to learn to let those go too. If we're turning our life around, we need to acknowledge where we went wrong, right? Acknowledge it and say, you know what? I'm gonna get the information from the peaceful solution, and I'm not gonna do that anymore. I'm gonna set my mind in advance not to ever go back. Don't look behind you. Remember there's an old saying, whatever direction you're looking is where you're walking. So if you're looking behind you at all your past indiscretionary things, or whatever the indiscretions, your past bad choices and mistakes, that's not the way you should be living. You should be moving forward, okay, not going backward, okay? Just remember, you only want to remember it for the fact that, okay, I don't want to do that again, you know. I never want to go that way again. Okay, so it says the first one in verbal abuse, and remember, Chris also explained mistakes don't include, the mistakes in parenting do not include verbal, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, or being negligent toward the needs of a child. These types of abuses are not mistakes. He told us they're willful and heinous violations of the innocence and trust of a child. And, you know, that's the great thing about children. You know, they're so trusting, you know. They really are. They're really amazing little people, you know. They really do put an awful lot of trust in an individual. Sometimes they shouldn't, but they do. It's just the nature of a child. So we shouldn't violate that in any way, shape, or form, and that's what we're going to learn about. We're going to learn how not to do that. So the first thing he went over was verbal abuse, about yelling and scolding and demeaning, insulting, ridiculing, or attacking a child with words. Those are forms of verbal abuse. And I saw an interesting video the other night of that one of the Peaceful Solution students showed about the power of words and how it affects our bodies. You know, it's an experiment that was done with water, and you know, where they had some people talking negative things to a bottle of water, and then some other group was talking positive things to bottles of water, and they froze them, and then they I guess they looked into the cellular level of the water, and they saw that the water that was spoken negatively to was actually formed a really ugly, some ugly formations in the ice crystal, where the one that was spoken positively to made a very beautiful image in the crystal of the water, in I don't know, the molecular structure of the water. And the point was, you know, we're 85% water, so you know, if we're speaking negatively to someone else or to ourselves, we're actually shaping ourselves, because that water was being shaped by either the negative comments or the positive ones. And I thought that was very interesting. Those are the kind of things that, you know, that's the great thing about the Peaceful Solution, to learn so much. Okay, then there's the physical abuse. You know, you have the maltreatment, physical injury of a child, which includes hitting, punching, slapping, kicking, shaking, burning, and other ways of inflicting pain. Not giving children food to eat, denying medical attention, and giving a child drugs and alcohol. You know, these are things that we should know better right there. You know, you should be able to look at that and go, no, you know, that's just not something you do. Okay? Those aren't mistakes if you're doing them. Those are bad choices. And then we learned about the short and long-term psychological, emotional, and physical effects of these types of abuses, whether they're verbal or physical. And at the bottom of page 13, we learned that children deserve love and respect, not abuse. The Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. And that goes back to the character unit that says everyone has the right to live in peace, safety, and security. Everyone does. Every man, woman, and child on the face of the earth. So let's flip over now to page 14. And let's go to the first visual. And let's talk a little bit about emotional abuse. And I hope you have your highlighters, your pens, pencils, or whatever, so you can underline certain words, circle them, because we're going to go over the meanings of some of these so you can get a better grip on what these words actually mean. Emotional abuse of a child can include ignoring, rejecting, isolating, exploiting, or corrupting, verbally assaulting, terrorizing, or neglecting the child. And those are some pretty harsh words there. And I want to look at, I think we probably would understand a few of those, like rejecting a child or ignoring them, not giving them the proper attention, or like Chris said, even, when you're, I learn a lot from the teachers that are teaching this that are parents. Chris has a lot of children. Certificaton has a lot of children. David's had children. I've never had a child from the baby stage up to the adult stage. I've caught them kind of in the middle. So, and I've had a lot, I've probably had over, I'd say 2,000 children in my life. I mean, I've been responsible for at least that many. If you're a teacher and you have students, you had a hand in raising that child. Okay, remember? That's what the author taught us. So you don't have to be a parent, okay? You don't have to be a mom or dad to be a parent. You can be a teacher and be a parent, all right? And the teacher has, teachers do a lot to shape and mold and form a student, an individual. Because teachers, believe it or not, after a child reaches a certain age, they spend a lot more time with the child than the parents do. A lot more time than the parents do. So they're being shaped and molded by that teacher as well. So the teachers need to take these things to heart. Even if you're not a parent, you don't have a child of your own that you can call your own, you still have a hand in raising the child. So it says, I'm going to go over a couple of these. I want to look at one, exploiting, if you can underline exploiting, because I want to understand that one. We want to understand that one a little better. So let's skip ahead to the next slide, because I believe I have the definition of exploiting on the next slide. Can you please change the slide? There you go. Exploit. All right. It says exploit means to take unfair advantage of. And there's a bunch of synonyms for that that you can I hope you can read, because I certainly can't. There's tons of them, but it basically means to take unfair advantage of a child, okay? Because remember, a child is very helpless. They're counting on us to take care of them, physically, emotionally, etc. It's our job to take care of them as a parent. So they're helpless. They're hoping that they're putting themselves in your hands, and they're hoping you make the right choices for them, because they don't have that ability when they're very, very young. They're putting their trust in us. It also means, exploiting also means as in to manipulate. As in to manipulate. When you manipulate somebody, I'm sure you guys have heard of that, don't manipulate me. It's like trying to jerk someone around, play somebody's emotions or play someone's feelings, take advantage of them, etc. Taking advantage of a child because they're very young and they're helpless, that's what a lot of people do, because a child can't, do anything to protect theirself at a very, very young age. And I want you to understand, it's sick to even think about it. But we got people in this world, and there's huge rings of people that abuse babies sexually at the age of 6 months. Okay? 6 months. As early as 6 months. Okay? So if you're thinking you're living in some world here, you got these little puppy dogs and pyramids and pink ponies floating everywhere with cotton candy and, well, nope, not quite like that. Because you're living in a world with people that haven't been taught true moral character, And the people that are doing these things to those very, very young children more than likely had one of the things you're going to learn about tonight done to them. This is the cycle. This is the cycle. It's just a cycle of abuse. They get abused in one way, shape, or form in their young age, and then when they get older, the manifestations of that abuse start to appear. But most people don't realize that's actually what they're seeing manifest to them. They don't. A lot of times we do understand. We might think, well, yeah, they might have been abused as a child themselves, but we really don't know the full spectrum of what we might be thinking or saying there. Let's put that slide back up, please. Okay, so remember, exploit means as in to use, like to take an unfair advantage of. Let's go to the next slide. I could see some of these words better. Let's look at the word corrupting. This is part of emotional abuse, corrupting, okay? Corrupting a child means degrading that child, degrading. That means bringing their body and their mind to a lower level, lower degree, by inflicting some kind of pain or suffering, emotionally or physically, ignoring children and not giving them the things that they need to grow and thrive, such as education, proper moral education, proper education in the schools, etc. These are all forms of abuse. Okay, I'm looking at corrupting. So it says to lower in character, dignity, or quality. That's what corrupting means. It means to lower in character, dignity, or quality. When you have that baby, I think it was Chris or Catan, or it might have even been David, a child, when they're born, they have a lot of strikes against them already. We tend to think of a baby as they're born and they got a clean slate. Well, their mind has a clean slate. It's kind of like, whatever's being written on it when they were in their mother's womb, and once they get out of the mother's womb, yeah, it's whatever's being written on it. Yeah, it just started at a certain time, but the things that they're suffering in their bodies, like some children that are born with all these different diseases, mental illnesses, or they're born with STDs, etc. They didn't do anything to get them, but they were passed down, or they have heart disease. They might have Asperger's, or they might have, how many different diseases are there out there, man? I've never really looked. I don't think I've looked up the number, but I guarantee you there's many, 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 many thousands of diseases out there. I used to have an ICD-9 book, which is an International Classification of Diseases book. The 9th edition was about this thick. So there was a whole lot of diseases in there that that you could read about that they used to do medical billing with. Can you put the slide back up, please? I'm gonna back to where it was. No, the last one, corrupting. Okay. When something becomes corrupt, it's like a corrupted file on a computer. It becomes slow. You notice that? You know what I'm talking about with the computer? When a file becomes corrupt, it's not even usable sometimes anymore because it's corrupted. Okay? And then sometimes you gotta get rid of your computer because your whole computer is fouled up. Okay? Well, the mind is the same as a computer. And corrupting a child by, these types of abuses that we're going to be talking about puts an indelible mark in their mind. And I was saying that they're already born with a lot of strikes already, that have been passed down genetically from, the 3rd and 4th generation. Great-great-grandparents, grandparents, mom and dad. And then the things we do too in our own bodies, once we start growing and developing. But these abuses, this corruption, it brings the child down, and not just in their mind and body, but in their character. Think about it this way. Is character education being taught as a curriculum in most places? No. Now, bits and pieces are, in fairness to parents, they try their best. School counselors, principals, teachers, they try to instill certain moral values in the children for the most part, things that they might have learned when they were growing up. But it's few and far between. They're mainly getting bombarded with Hollywood, Hollywood and social media. That's what they're getting. Once they become 5, 6, 5, 6, they got phones. I've seen them. They already got the phone in their hand, and I'm wondering, what are they doing with that death sentence in their hand? Who handed them that death sentence? What is a 5-year-old doing with a cell phone? It just doesn't make any sense. But I know parents do it again, and that's one of those mistakes in parenting that we're talking about. That's a mistake. Okay? If you haven't been taught the effects of what's on that phone and what it's doing to a child's mind and how it's corrupting your child's mind, then that's a mistake until you learn, until you've been told, and until you start to understand what it's actually doing to your child. So let's look at the next definition. I wanted to read some of those synonyms, but I can't because it's so blurry on here. I apologize. I didn't have a. Let's go back to the emotional abuse slide that I was on. I think it's the first one, the first slide. There you go. Okay, I'm going to continue to read here. So I gave you the definition of exploiting and corrupting, verbal assaulting, terrorizing. Okay, so although the visible signs of emotional abuse in children can be difficult to detect, the hidden scars of this type of abuse manifest in numerous behavioral ways, including insecurity, poor self-esteem, destructive behavior, angry acts like fire setting and animal cruelty. That's interesting, because I fall into the category. I used to do a lot of these things. My dad was a fire marshal, and I was out setting fires. I don't know why I like playing with matches. I just did. But I think it was for me, it was more of a fascination with fire, like matches and starting fires. I think all children kind of have that curiosity in them. But animal cruelty. Remember what we learned about animal cruelty and how it can lead to abuse of human beings later on if we don't learn to overcome those behaviors. It causes withdrawal, poor development of basic skills, alcohol or drug abuse, suicide, difficulty forming relationships, and unstable job histories. And I got to tell you, I'm a lot of those unstable job histories, man, I couldn't keep a job for more than a week, And I think it was mainly because I thought stealing was a lot easier than getting a job. It's like easier to go steal people's property than it was to go work for it. And I'm talking about before I learned what I know now. I was on a very destructive path, okay, extremely destructive. And it's no secret that I spent, over 20 years of my life behind bars because of it, but putting someone behind bars, that didn't help me none. I mean, I just found ways behind bars to commit crimes, until I learned, until somebody brought me some information and I started, I got kind of tired of the path that I was on. I was kind of like, I got to figure out a way to, turn things around here, but I didn't really have the answers until somebody brought the peaceful solution to me. So prison isn't, we talked about that too. Prison isn't the answer. Locking people up isn't the answer to solve our problems with crimes and abuse and things. So these are the things that can manifest, these visible signs that we see people doing. And a lot of times we see people acting out, but we don't really associate it with the hidden things that were done to them when they were very young or etc. But I can guarantee you, because of the lack of moral character in our world, many people have been abused, sexually and otherwise. not just sexually, but emotionally, physically, etc. But again, many of you know the things that have been done to you in the past. Should you hold on to it and keep thinking about it? No, you need to let it go. You need to let it go. You need to realize the person that did that to you was not taught the peaceful solution. Okay? You need to learn, you need to understand that. We need to understand that until you're taught the peaceful solution and you're taught moral character, technically you're not guilty. Now, I'm not saying go do something because, well, yeah, I heard that teacher say if I go out and abuse somebody and I don't know the peaceful solution, I'm not really guilty. No, you're guilty, but you're not guilty fully because you haven't been taught yet, is what I'm talking about. You're still going to be guilty if you get in front of a judge. He's going to put you in prison, or worse, could be worse. If you murder somebody, you might have to suffer a death penalty yourself. Okay, so let's go to the next. Let's skip a couple slides here because we already did that. Okay, yeah, let's go to this one. Okay, let's talk a little bit about sexual abuse here. And actually, can you go to the next slide? Because I'm not sure. Okay, go back. All right, go back. All right, so having set it up with the emotional abuse, we're going to get into sexual abuse, and this is where we really gotta like you're in a classroom setting, you're probably going to have them read that to themselves, okay? Unless you just got all males in your class, but if you have females, of course you're gonna want to just read that to have them all read it to themselves. I'm going to read it to you because I'm not in that situation. So, sexual abuse, it says the sexual activities may include all forms of oral, genital, or anal contact by or to the child, or abuse that does not involve contact, such as exhibitionism, voyeurism, or using the child in the production of pornography. Sexual abuse includes a spectrum of activities ranging from rape to physically less intrusive sexual abuse. Now, let's go to the next visual. And man, I'm really hoping I can read this. Yes, I can. Okay, so now let's put that down just for a second. I got to explain something because we're living in the Western world. Can you turn that slide off for just a moment, please? So I can set something in the minds. We're living in the Western culture. Okay, and for the most part, when you go outside, people got clothes on. Right? Well, in the summertime, some people choose to dress very scantily at times, but everybody's got some clothing on, some way, shape, or form. They got some kind of clothing on. But you know what the reality is in the world? Not everyone wears clothes. Do you realize that? There's still people that don't wear clothes. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do when you get sent to that country over there where those tribesmen in the jungle don't wear clothes? Are you going to just sit down and teach class with them, or take your clothes off and join them? And what are you going to do? Have you thought about that? No, we haven't even thought about that, have we? Because we're living in the West. We're living in the West. Not everyone's thought systems and not everyone's moral system is the same. Even though moral character is, basically universal in some aspects, it's not universal in every aspect. Okay, and we're going to learn about that because we're talking about sexual abuse and the root of sexual abuse, the root cause of it. So let's look at this next slide now, having said that. What are some cultures that embrace nudity, it says? Various cultures around the globe have historically embraced nudity as a natural state of being, often linked to beliefs about body positivity, freedom, and connection to nature. In other words, it's natural not to have clothes on. For instance, the ancient Greeks celebrated the human form in art and athletics. often competing in the nude during the Olympic Games. In more contemporary settings, nudity is a cultural norm in certain indigenous tribes, such as the Himba or Namibia, where modesty is defined differently. Additionally, countries like Sweden and Denmark promote public nudity in saunas and beaches. You know, I'm going to tell you, I'll just be straight up with you. I lived in Hawaii for about a year, and I would go to Waikiki Beach. This is back when I was like, 22, 23. I was on the run. I figured if I ran to Hawaii from Alaska, I could sleep on the beach at night because it was nice and warm. And folks, it's not warm on the beach at night. It's freezing on the beach at night, but the water's warm, and the sharks are hungry too, I'm sure. So, but anyway, I was laying on the beach, minding my own business, and all of a sudden a woman came naked right next to me. And I asked her if she realized, you don't have any clothes on? She goes, we don't wear clothes where I'm from. She was from someplace in Europe where it was natural to go to the beach with no top on, with no clothes. Okay? And in Hawaii, you get people from all over the earth that come and tourists there. So it shocked me. It shocked even me. You know, I mean, as a young person, I was involved in a lot of bad stuff, but even I was shocked when that person got next to me. I was like, what? Am I dreaming? You know, I couldn't believe it. But then I learned, you know, I got a wake-up call that not everyone has the same thoughts about nudity that we do. Okay? And this is something that's a challenge that you're going to face in this world. So you got to get used to, you're going to have to get educated on this subject here, because not everyone sees it the way we do, but they will. Let's go back to that slide. It says, additionally, countries like Sweden and Denmark promote public nudity in saunas and beaches, reflecting a relaxed attitude toward the human body. Interestingly, statistics show that about 40% of adults in Western culture have participated in some form of nudism, highlighting a growing acceptance of this lifestyle. So notice, you could be at your neighborhood 7-Eleven, and all of a sudden some naked person walks in to get some milk. I've seen that on TV, you know, where they show people that like to do exhibitionism in public. You know, they like to go out with no clothes on and just walk around. Or they like to streak, you know, at public events, at sporting events or whatever, take off their top and just run and have the cops chasing them. And, you know, some people get a thrill out of those kind of things. And some people think, well, everybody ought to be living like this. You know, what are you wearing those clothes for, man? Those are real obtrusive, aren't they? You got to put those tight pants on and that shirt. And man, you know, if you can be naked, you're going to be nice and free. And this is their thought process, because they don't know what exposing their body is doing to the person that's looking at it. Okay? Let's just start with that premise. Let's go to the next slide. So the other day, I noticed something. It was really strange. I had to look into it because I noticed something. They were having a conclave in Rome, and the bishops or the cardinals were all walking into the Sistine Chapel, and it was shocking to even me. I didn't realize all the nudity. There was nudity everywhere. It was just a bunch of naked bodies on the ceiling, on the walls. And I'm thinking, these cardinals are in there voting on a new pope? With those influences all over the walls? And how did they get there, I thought. You know, like that's kind of odd, right? But let's read this so we can understand this a little better. This is from Alicia magazine. It says, the Sistine Chapel enthralls thousands of tourists a year with its amazing beauty. What many are surprised to find, though, is the number of naked bodies on its walls and ceiling. St. John Paul II explained in his Theology of the Body book how, quote, in the great period of Greek classical art, there are works of art whose subject is the human body in its nakedness. This leads the viewer through the body to the whole personal mystery of man. Now, these are his words. In contact with these works, we do not naturally feel drawn by their content to looking lustfully. In other words, he's saying that those pictures that are on the chapel wall, since they're not depicting people doing sexual acts, it's not causing me to lust when I look at it. Like, it's not causing me to desire, something with that figure. This is what he's thinking. So let's hear the rest of it. Depiction of nudity in this way is clearly completely different than the use of nudity in pornography, he says. John Paul II points out how pornographic productions have the explicit intention of arousing lust. They present the human body as an object to be used. Porn does not respect the dignity of the human person, and the sexual act is exploited for personal satisfaction at the expense of another. Now listen to what he says here in contrast to the nudity on the walls in the Sistine Chapel. He says, in contrast, nudity in Christian art is meant to reveal the beauty of humanity and the marvelous work of the Creator. It has deep symbolism and is not meant to be a stumbling block, but a doorway to a greater appreciation of the personal mystery of humanity. Well, I got news for him. I'm going to keep it a mystery what's under my clothes. Okay? I want it to be a mystery. Okay? And I don't even want you to even think about what it might look like under there. Now, you shouldn't even be thinking about that. But here's the catch. Here's the catch to what he said. Again, do you realize that theologians, preachers, popes, priests, we're all men. They're all men. Does everybody understand that? Oh, you got some women too. I don't think they're having a women popes yet, but they've had, women preachers, etc. They're human beings. Okay, they're human beings. So therefore, they have feelings, right? Okay, and they also have either a moral character or they have to work on that moral character. They have lack of moral character. Okay, so sometimes their thought process isn't quite up to par. Because if you listen to what he just said, does that match what you're being told in the peaceful solution? For instance, in the respect unit, we talked about clothing and how clothing actually promotes, honor and respect among people. Like, how judges dress a certain way. Dressing modestly promotes, you as being, having a high moral character, whereas wearing skimpy clothes, etc., people can think you're easy and you're loose, etc., right? Y'all remember that? Okay. So if you don't have any clothes on, what is that saying? Is all of a sudden that okay? It's not disrespectful? It's not disrespectful to walk into a store with no clothes on? Yes, you are actually disrespecting the person that's in that store that has their clothes on. Because it's not decent. It's not decent to not dress properly. We learned that in the respect unit. So we can try to I guess, what do you call that? Explain these things away, but you do realize that when you're looking at a bunch of naked babies, which are on that wall in that chapel, there's a lot of nakedness. There's not a naked men, not naked women, naked babies. Chris mentioned when we went to Washington, D.C., we were shocked at some of the monuments that we had to walk by that actually could be classified as child pornography. because there was children standing next to adults naked in pretty interesting poses. And that's not the only place. You know, the author said he went to Rome before and he saw the same thing all over Rome. A bunch of nakedness and statues and images all over the place with men and boys. Okay. And what I believe we're going to find out, I believe what we're actually going to learn is those images are what's promoting and causing the men to lust after these young children. I hear myself somewhere. Okay. Sorry, had a little glitch up here. What was that? I heard myself over there. Okay, so anyway, you know, could these things actually be causing people to lust after young children? Think about it. You know, the peaceful solution's big about what you put on your walls. You know, they're called influences, right? What you have in your environment, those are influences. So what if you had just a bunch of naked pictures all over your walls? You know, I used to marvel when I was early on in the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. I was living in Laredo, Texas, and there's a lot of garages, you know, where they have, you know, mechanic shops. And I spent a lot of time in mechanic shops because of my driving. And I would walk into mechanic shops and I would see posters of, you know, like young teenage girls in Hollywood. Like Britney Spears. Back then it was like Britney Spears and Hannah Montana and, you know, others. And they were in very provocative poses. And they were scantily clad. You know, they had very little clothing on. And I remember thinking to myself back then, you know, if I had pictures of a girl that wasn't my daughter, even if it was my daughter, if I had images like that on my computer, they would arrest me for child pornography. Did you know that? And I used to think to myself, so how does Hollywood get away with that? Because, you know, child pornography, you know, any kind of image that's of a child under the age of 18 that's provocative in any way is classified as child pornography. But yet you see it everywhere in Hollywood. You don't see no one getting led in handcuffs anywhere. You know, and I used to always say, well, tell the parents, you know, don't try that at home, you know. Even though they're doing it in Hollywood, don't try what they're doing at home. Because I guess they have a license to do these things in some places. But it's still child pornography, whatever you want to call it. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it entertainment. I'm going to call it what the federal government and the state of Texas calls it. They call it child pornography. And somehow or another, these are some of the things you have to understand, the influences that we're being bombarded with that are creating the sexual abuse that we see everywhere. The sexual perversion that we see, the twisting of the morals and the sexual abuse that's occurring with children. Let's go to the next slide. It says the effects of abuse result from the abuse itself. Now, this is I'm reading sexual abuse here on page 14. The effects of abuse result from the abuse itself, from the family's response to the situation, and from the stigmatization that accompanies abuse. The symptoms can include post-traumatic symptoms, precocious sexualization, depression, anxiety, guilt, fear, sexual dysfunction, dissociative symptoms, eating disorders, substance abuse, prostitution, regressive behaviors such as a return to thumb-sucking or bedwetting, runaway behavior, and academic and behavior problems. These are the effects of sexual abuse. And let's talk a little bit. This picture, I got this image here for a reason, because it was something that I remembered when I was growing up. There was a movie, I don't know if y'all remember Michael Landon. He was considered, one of the more, I think he made Little House on the Prairie and some other more family-friendly entertainment back in the early 70s. And he made a movie that I'll never forget. It was called The Loneliest Runner. And in that movie, there was a boy who wet his bed. And his mother, what she would do is she would hang his sheets out the window, for his friends to see that he was a bedwetter. Because she thought, well, I'll just do this and he'll get over that bedwetting, right? And he would be so embarrassed, like him and his friends would drive up and there was his sheets hanging out the window, and he would just one day he's walking home with this girl that he liked, and she sees the bed sheet hanging out the window, and he's like, oh, you can imagine what this would do to a young person. So what he started doing, he started running. He would run home every day after school before anybody could get, any of the children in the neighborhood could see those bed sheets, so he could get them out of the window. And he would run through hills, and he learned to be a great runner. And what occurred was, at the end of the movie, because of the abuse his mother was inflicting on him by putting those sheets out the window, now she was only thinking, this is going to help him get over the bedwetting. She didn't realize she was abusing him by doing that. That she was inflicting some very, very heavy emotional damage on the child. The child was just, I know, because I used to be a bedwetter when I was young. And I remember my first grade teacher, one day, she said, smells like somebody wets the bed. And the girl that I liked next to me was like, is that you? You just don't know how horrible that is. And it wasn't something that I don't know why I was doing it, but I did till I was about 8 years old. And then finally I just stopped. And my mom tried everything to get me to stop. I just didn't stop. I just, till I was about 8. So I knew how this boy felt, how embarrassing it was. So at the end of the movie, though, he became an Olympic runner and he won a gold medal. And the commentator there asked him, he says, so who do you owe this to? Who would you say that was your greatest inspiration for winning this medal? And he said, well, I owe it all to my mom and dad. He didn't down his mom. I thought that was great. He didn't down his mom and say, well, my mom did this. And he said, I give credit to my mom because his mom got him to running. It was a negative thing, but he turned it into something positive, I guess is what I'm saying, right? He didn't let it eat him up the rest of his life and anything like that. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. I think what I'm going to really have to do is I really can't read that slide, so I'm going to go ahead and just ad-lib. I'm going to get those things probably printed out next time because I can't read on this screen here. So let's go ahead and take that down for now. I do want to go, let's go to the one after that. I might be able to read a little better. Okay. All right. Go back. Okay, go back to the last one. Let's just try it. Let me see what I can do. Yeah, okay, I can read it now. So let's look at the word disorder because we're talking about eating disorders, different disorders, different diseases, different things that take place because of these types of abuses, right? That word disorder, it means an illness or condition that disrupts normal physical or mental functions. And it talks about eating disorders, skin disorders, etc., mental disorders. And some of the similar words to disorder are disease, infection, problem, condition, dysfunction, affliction, sickness, illness, etc., disability, virus, irregularity, these are all associative words of the word disorder. Now, when something is, let's do some simple math, right? How many of you like math? Okay. Even if you don't, hear me out. So, disorder, right? When you hear the word disorder, you should think out of order, right? It means it's out of order. Something's out of order, right? Something is out of order. So let's find out what's out of order. Disorder also means the disruption of peaceful and law-abiding behavior. Did you hear that? Peaceful and law-abiding behavior. Okay. So what would be another word for peaceful and law-abiding behavior? Yeah, positive character, right? Practicing positive character, practicing the peaceful solution, right? Peaceful, law-abiding behavior. So if you're not practicing proper moral character, then you're in disorder. You have disorder. And you're causing disorder. Okay? So if somebody has mental disorders, somebody has any kind of eating disorder, somebody has any kind of disorder at all, it stems from not practicing peace, not being taught moral character and practicing it. That's the problem. That's why we have disorder all over the world right now. It's very simple. It's not a hard equation. Okay? It's a very simple equation. It's getting people to sit down for a minute and stop thinking about money and all the money they can make off all these disorders and really just listen to the simplicity of the peaceful solution. It's really simple. Let's just go to the next slide. Because remember I talked about the word disease and how we pronounce it wrong. We say disease, like there's some kind of Z there. There's no Z in that word, is there? They trained us to do that for a reason. So we don't make the connection between what is causing all these sexual diseases, disorders. Because if you got nakedness all around, nudity, you're out of order. And if I was a judge, I would say, you're out of order. You need to get back in order. You need to get in order. In other words, you need to learn what order is. And Peaceful Solution is here to set it in order. We have the plan to set everything in order. All we got to do is get people to listen. So, dis-ease. Remember that word dis-ease. It's dis-ease. Even here, look what they say. Look what they say. It's from the word dis, like as without, and ease, as in peace. Or, what's that word? They say ease. Okay. The word ease, it says, means physical comfort, undisturbed state of the body, tranquility, peace of mind. From Old French, whatever that word is, meaning comfort, pleasure, well-being, and opportunity. Okay, so they even understand it's not a special word, disease. It's not a special word. It's dis-ease. It's no peace. It's lack of peace. It's lack of promoting or practicing the peaceful solution. Very simple. So if we're not respecting our neighbor and we're exposing them to nakedness with statues all over the street, and those images are going into people's eyeballs, things that they shouldn't be seeing, it's having an effect on these people and they don't even realize it. It's having an effect. It doesn't matter what we know or believe, it's having some kind of an effect when we see this nakedness all around. Okay? And it's promoting lust It's promoting ideas in people's hearts and minds that shouldn't be there. And that's why the peaceful solution says, put your clothes on, learn to dress properly. Okay? No, it's not innocent. It's not an innocent thing. Yes, the human body is a marvelous thing. But as I said, mine's going to remain a mystery. Okay? It's going to remain a mystery. And you know, and that's not one mystery you should try to solve either. You know, that's just something we should already just know. You know, it's normal to wear clothes. Okay? It's proper, it's respectful, it's moral, because it won't bring harm to anybody if you wear clothing. But if you don't, it's called immoral conduct, and it's going to bring a consequence on somebody. Whether you realize it or not, whether you understand it or not, you are actually hurting your neighbor by doing those things. And you can't explain it away with psychology and all these other things that people try to use to explain these things away. We have proof. The proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the millions of children that have been sexually abused, even by people in high authority that were elected in the Sistine Chapel, or that were preachers in churches, or that were school teachers, or that were Boy Scout leaders. You know, that was the other thing, and that I think Chris kind of alluded to. If you ever seen, I couldn't show it here because it's pornography. If you ever seen the statue of the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts in the Washington, D.C., it's a naked Boy Scout leader with a naked child walking next to him. And I thought, that's what they mean by Boy Scouts? Scouting for boys. Oh, okay. I didn't realize it till I saw that, what they really meant and what that all stemmed from. And I thought, this is disgusting. This world is very sick, and it needs a peaceful solution character education program. And I'm glad you're all here learning it. My time is up for the night. And the next class is going to be 5/14/2025. I already went over. That'll be Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Quit encouraging me to break the rules over there, please. So thanks for joining us. Remember, keep these things in mind. Remember, the peaceful solution is what's going to bring peace to this earth. Have a great evening.